My name is Tiffany Spraggins-Payne. You are listening to Zigzag, a weekly podcast discussing women in science, technology, transportation, engineering, entrepreneurship, mathematics, and related industries. On Zigzag, we discuss inclusion and diversity news, current trends, and have special guests speak about their experiences, including their competitive edge in the marketplace.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Martin, the producer for the Grit Studios. This is part 2 of Tiffany's interview with Dr. Kimberly McGlonn, founder of Grant Blvd, a sustainable apparel brand also working toward criminal justice reform. Now, if you didn't get a chance to check out part 1, I would highly recommend listening to that first. There's a link below in the show notes. Real quick before we get into the interview, we want to tell you about Lighting the Torch, a cocktail party and networking event that's coming up in October, hosted by our parent organization, the Enterprise Center, in partnership with the Minority Entrepreneurship Development Week. Now, the funds raised are going to support the Enterprise Center's programs to accelerate the growth of minority-owned businesses. Lighting the Torch takes place Thursday, October 4th, 2018, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Enterprise Center located in West Philadelphia. Learn more and purchase your tickets online at ltt2018.eventbrite.com. That's ltt2018.eventbrite.com. And that link will be below in the show notes. Without further ado, here we go.
So tell us a little bit about some future trends that you've identified in your field.
So exciting. You know, sustainable fashion is in one way, it's one of the fastest growing segments of the fashion industry. And so there are a number of brands, there are a few, really a handful of them, mostly in New York or in LA, who are their margins of profit are impressive. And so there is definitely a space there for profitability,
yes,
and for going about that ambition of being profitable in a way that has a sense of responsibility. So there's definitely a lot of movement around sustainable action in fashion. And there's the field is actually the second dirtiest in the world. You know, energy is, in terms of its damage to the planet, is the leading. You know, we talk about how we use oil, how damaging fracking is. When we talk about how we source energy, it's nasty. But the fashion industry is incredibly dirty too. And the rapidity with which we are requiring manufacturers to produce garments that we're going to throw away is so damaging, and it's such a negative impact on our planet. So not only is there a margin for profitability, but there is definitely a demand for reimagining, revising our processes. So that's incredibly exciting to me. And you know, and it's a unfortunate thing, but I think it's a positive thing that the documentary 13th, the arrest of Meek Mill, there have been a number of things that have been happening in pop culture that have pivoted the conversation about, wait, mass incarceration is a thing. What does that mean? How does that impact communities? What are the government's responsibilities? And now I see as a trend, and I'm definitely comfortable in being one of the brands that leads the way in this thinking about how are companies responding to the need to push back on mass incarceration. You know, like, what are the other brands that are willing to take the tough stand of saying, like, yo, this is inhumane. This is a complete violation of human and civil rights.
Yes.
And how are we going to fix that? Where's the healing? Because until we can get our industries into a point of healing, the damage continues. And so those are two places where I see the momentum being positive, and I'm really hopeful and excited that this is one brand that will continue to kind of push ahead that conversation about what are we expecting and what are we accepting? Because that's the other thing I think that people have to think about. Why do we accept so little? And, you know, as an activist, I'm like, man, we need to expect more. Forget that.
Yes. You know, it's so interesting. I watch a lot of documentaries and a lot of movies, and I'm really curious to find out from you how you've been able to leverage Grant Blvd to help returning citizens reacclimate themselves.
Well, we're really very young and thinking about what that's going to look like. We are at right now it's doing the real on the ground fact finding.
Yes.
Like that's why I said, I'm excited to take this day and go to see this correctional institute. And I was able to do it with people who are Republicans and Democratic senators, because there's also work to be done in terms of thinking about our political reform and putting business in conversation with lawmakers and policymakers about how we can approach things differently. So we're in a point of, from the ground up, from pillar level, thinking about how can this corporation be crafted, not retroactively in terms of positive social impact, but from creation, which is a totally different approach to how we can think about corporate social responsibility. It's not like creating and selling something and then on the back end, which is, there's no shade to companies who do that. That work has to be done too. There has to be some retrofitting. But there's also an approach of saying, no, I'm going to create a company that is intended to be profitable and intended to be mindful of planet impact and intended to think about who are the people who we're employing and how can we be of service to the communities where we set up shop. And that's what we're in the process of doing and figuring out which, and I don't want to give too much away, but we're thinking about what is the sweet spot for us in Philadelphia and figuring out creating that landscape where our consumers are people who are in the know and people who are in the struggle.
Would you say that right now is your unique value proposition?
That's no doubt. I mean, and I think that's also coupled with just to be completely frank, my unique positioning in this conversation. I have a PhD. I'm a councilwoman in Montgomery County. So I have some I don't want to use the word verified, but I have some
credentials.
I have some credentials, and I have some important relationships with people who are progressive and in their own conversation about their privilege, and people who are in their own conversation about their oppression. And as a CEO, I really am really excited about being able to act as a translator between getting goods to market that sit at the need for demand, but that I can pivot back and be like, let's talk about what you need. Let's talk honestly about what your own voice about what needs to be happening. And then let me translate that to people who in their intention want to do better.
Yes. You know what? Let's zag a little bit in the conversation. I love this because I can talk to you all day about this. But, I want you to tell our listeners, earlier I mentioned that my grandfather put Souls on Ice in my hand.
Yes.
Native Son in my hands. To Kill a Mockingbird, I loved one of my esteemed teachers who I'm still in contact with today. Like, had it not been for her, I wouldn't have minored in African American studies in college in journalism. Yeah. But getting back to you, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your journey, right? So your father, he was a farmer?
No, my father worked for the post office. Like in Milwaukee, a couple things. Milwaukee is just such an interesting case study in terms of American industry. It's in ways like Detroit, in ways like Camden, those cities where there was a period of time when there was a great influx of industry in areas that were relatively urban, right? And then those jobs left.
Yes.
And my parents their livelihood wasn't dependent upon that industry. My dad did work for a time for A.O. Smith, which is like a manufacturing facility. But by the time I was like 7, he transitioned to working for the post office, and he still works for the post office. And the post office has been so pivotal in giving people, particularly vets, people who are African American, who are Latino, access to middle class living.
Yes.
And so, I recognize that privilege. Both of my parents for a time worked for the post office in this context of this highly segregated city that is Milwaukee. So north side of Milwaukee is entirely black. South side of Milwaukee is entirely immigrants, mostly Latinos. And the east side, which is like the downtown, is where all whites live. Like that is just the way it has always been, and that's just documented truth. That's not not an emotional perception. That's just the way that the landscape has not
constructed.
That's just the truth of it. And I go back to Milwaukee maybe once a year, and one thing that always it's so heavy for me. It's so hard is that you can see the depression in people's posture as they walk down the street. It sits in the bodies of black people in particular on the north side, which is where my dad still lives. One zip code, 53206, has the highest rate of incarceration in the country. And I grew up in 53210. Grant Blvd is at 53210. My dad lives in 53205.
Wow.
So even though there was a sense of economic distancing from that struggle, you can't travel through the north side and not see it. And so while my parents don't have stories of incarceration, my grandfather was incarcerated. He got a master's degree in social work in prison.
Wow.
And so as a Black person, and I think that for a lot of Latinos, not all, but and definitely the statistics bear out more for African Americans than any other demographic in this country. Most of us are only 1 or 2 people removed from a story of incarceration. You know, we don't have to travel too far. I've had table conversation with 5 or 6 African Americans that I didn't necessarily know that well, and Grant Blvd comes up, and you know, and you ask the question, who knows someone who's been incarcerated, and that's everybody. Yes. You know, and so that's another reality for this story of how mass incarceration has affected people who identify as African American. But going back to your question, and I know we've kind of zagged away from it.
That's okay. That's the whole purpose, right? Zigging and zagging.
Milwaukee, and my story in Milwaukee is very much so rooted in, you know, just knowing that truth. Yes. You know, it wasn't my mom. She was obviously, her life, her service was dedicated in that direction. But I didn't need my mother as I got older to understand that was real. My favorite cousin, my favorite babysitter when I was little, he was incarcerated when I was 14. And he and I haven't talked really I'm going to see him in a few weeks, and I'm really excited to go back and say to him to his face how much his sending me those leather goods from the federal prison that he was in stuck with me. That act of distant love and affection and thoughtfulness was how he communicated it to me when he was incarcerated. And is he a perfect person? No. But all of us are guilty of transgressions. And that's the thing that I think is so interesting to me about our conversations about criminality, is that so many of us feel like, you know, we're above it. And the reality is that everyone has done something that has transcended or transgressed beyond a moral or a social law. That's the nature of being alive. And so for me, that informs a deep sense of compassion for the truth, which is that we are all fallible. We all make mistakes. And we all need some opportunity to either self-correct, which actually the truth is most of us cannot do. Most of us don't have the personal fortitude or resilience or the know-how to just fix ourselves. And that's a grace to be able to be in that space to do that. But most people need a team of people, parents, community members, religious leaders, neighbors, to pull them into themselves and to just say, you know, there's another way. And that's just a part of my understanding of people, of human nature.
And I think that's so interesting because I have done a ton of work with adjudicated youth. You know, at the age of, I want to say maybe 15, I had the privilege to participate in one of these programs called Unimaginable Isolation, where I believe it was the University of Art that solicited a bunch of high school students to come out and actually work with some lifers in Graterford. Wow. And I can remember I was maybe one of 6 youth that walked the halls of Graterford. You know, you just hear men just kind of wailing, you know. And all I can remember was my mentor at the time, his hand on my shoulder, just telling me to just look forward. Just keep looking forward. Don't worry about what you hear, because once we get to where we need to go through clearance, you're going to be all right there. You know, we've already primed these gentlemen. They're okay. You know, and so with that being said, me sharing that story with you as a young person, walking through the halls of Graterford, participating in a program that's totally like, you know, I just responded to the solicitation. Like, you signed up, you know, to support this particular population of people who, if it were not for you and others, they wouldn't have a platform.
You know, that's certainly the ambition. And I have to say that for me, so much of the direction that I see this moving is very much so informed by women who dedicated their lives to the fight for freedom. It's Harriet Tubman, it's Sojourner Truth, it's Shirley Chisholm, it's Angela Davis, it's Lorraine Hansberry, it's Maya Angelou. You know, it's Michelle Alexander, who wrote, you know, The New Jim Crow, which she was also a pivotal person in Ava DuVernay's work, 13th. I come from, right, because that's such a subconscious slip of a truth that I feel very much so connected to centuries of women who just wanted to be of help because that's just what they felt compelled to do. And that, you know, and that is very much so. It's a part of my family story. It's a part of my work as a teacher. You know, teachers have always been, I think, in that profession, those who are so committed to just seeing the best in other people and helping that best to kind of emerge in authentic terms. And I still see myself in that way. So yeah, I'm pivoting to being a businesswoman, but in this particular pursuit, I see my work, my 15, 16 years in the classroom as a teacher, as essential to the successful execution of this vision.
Yes.
It's how do I teach consumers that there's another way, and how do I teach my employees that I'm in this with them and for them, and that, I have faith that we can bring all of our struggles into better positioning,
Yes.
that we can do that we can sculpt and reimagine ourselves, not as criminals, not as drug addicts, not as, as failures, but as makers,
Yes.
as creatives, and
Yes.
then in the larger picture as pillars of our communities who can be of service and encouraging service in our corporate culture. That's just being a part of what we do. Super exciting work.
That's incredible. I want you to talk a little bit about how you set strategy and how you pull together high-performing teams through collaboration.
Yeah, I think so much of it is tied to understanding specialized skill.
Yes.
The role of CEO is so convoluted and complicated. The pacing is so intense. It's helpful to understand that I don't do it all. That
Yes.
I delegate to people who have specialized talent, and that I really invest our conversations, our early work, in understanding the bigger work, which is, let's talk about where you stand on environmentalism, and let's talk about where you stand on social activism, because
Yes.
that's at the heart of this company's mission. And so we just have to be values aligned. And that's a part of the strategy, right?
Yes.
It's building collaborations and bringing together people to this team, this corporate team, where everyone is value aligned. Because if that is not there for this particular kind of venture, it cannot work.
And also, I want you to talk to us about some of the early stage role models or mentors that you've had.
Let's see. I have an emerging role model. And that actually, I don't want to sound cliche, but my mother, she is 63 now. Sorry, Mom. She's 63 now. And she is working on her master's degree. She's called me the other night.
Awesome.
She just got a scholarship offer to go to pursue her PhD. And she's a later in life graduate student. So that for me is one incredibly empowering local story of it's never too late to pivot to something new.
Yes.
So many of us, I think we think if we don't arrive at 40, if we don't arrive at 50, then all is lost.
Yes.
And it's been really, really encouraging to have the example of my mother, who as an older returning student has said, no, we are always in charge of how we play and experiment and the risks that we take. And that doesn't end.
Yes.
Aging doesn't end that. And so that's been a really important example of just being free to just giving myself permission to evolve, and for that to be a continual process.
Speaking of giving yourself permission to evolve, what is your no-fail go-to when you're in a creative rut?
Wow. It's Black culture, honestly. It's Black filmmakers, it's Black visual artists, it's Black storytellers and, writers in terms of like theater and also, poetry. That for me puts me back into conversation with, and that word conversation, I've said it probably 10 times, because I think that so much of how I process things is through that communication. And I'm so inspired by, continually, repeatedly, by people who understand the struggle in other terms.
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of the arts, is that there's so many different ways to communicate that struggle. And ultimately that's what fuels me, is like getting back into that, contributing to the forward progress of helping people who are not all Black, actually. We can think about Latinos, people who identify as lesbian, bisexual, gay, queer, transgender. There's so many different manifestations of that struggle. And when I listen to sit with those stories, those narratives, that fuels me every time. Listening to the story of the woman who came from nothing, or the man who crawled from under the rock. Those stories captured in art, they always enliven my drive to just keep pushing, to keep reimagining, to keep, doing my own fight in the service of people who I know need advocates, because I can.
Yes, that's good stuff. I love that, capturing people's stories through art.
Yeah.
I love that. that. So, with that being said, I want you to talk to us about your approach to leadership development, because you are a PhD,
Yes,
and you are a teacher first,
Yes.
and now you've turned entrepreneur, but you're also an activist.
Yes.
So what does leadership development look like in all of those varied contexts for you?
If I could say it in a word or in a phrase, for me, my mechanism to growing as a leader has been in saying yes. I was first approached to be a councilwoman by a woman who is she's an activist, and she has spent her life as a white woman addressing white privilege. Like, that's what she does, right? That's her job, is in helping people to acknowledge what white privilege looks like. And I saw her in a midterm election, which is oftentimes when voting is very low. People don't often come out. Please vote. We got to vote in midterm elections. But I was at the polls, and she said, we have someone resigned, and we have the power to make an appointment. Would you just throw your name in the ring? Like, you have this interesting experience as a classroom teacher. You've lived in a couple different places. Just apply.
Yes.
And I said yes. And so for me as a leader, it's been taking those opportunities to just say yes and to learn from new opportunities, new experiences, what I will, and taking the time to reflect on what it's taught me, and then teaching about it. Because in teaching, that's how that's for me, that's one of the ways we learn best, is in teaching someone else about what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Yes.
And so a leadership development strategy has definitely been being open to opportunities as they come, and being very careful about trying to be careful about how I use my time.
Yes.
And reflecting, for me, good leaders are those who are reflective. And so that's always been a part of my own development strategy, my own personal strategy. Say yes, take in what you can, reflect on what you learned, give it back, teach someone else about what worked, what didn't work.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I would love to learn from you what success looks like.
Wow. That's just so interesting. In a capitalist society, success, I think it looks like, there has to be some sense of financial stability, security. And I think that in thinking about, what the future holds, that's always scary, particularly as someone who sees myself as a creative, and I know the numbers on small businesses, that risk of, making sure that my daughter's college fund continues to be funded is something that I'm mindful of.
Yes.
But the larger success to me is modeling positive social environmental impact, and developing a movement. Really, the largest kind of success for me is actually not, I think that the numbers will bear out that there's evidence that it's been fruitful.
Yes.
But the larger goal is to propel a movement
yes.
of social and economic discussion about what companies need to do, and how companies can be triple bottom line, can be mindful of planet and profit and people,
yes.
And be run by women. That to me is the measure of success, is that people say, women do this? Women are doing this.
Yes.
Women can do it. Women are doing this. And let's look to see how Grant Blvd has managed from the ground up to build a corporation that is working at the intersections of sustainability and positive social good.
I love it. I love it. For those who are listening in, today my guest is Dr. Kimberly McGlonn. She's the founder and creator of Grant Blvd, which is a sustainable apparel brand that supports returning and incarcerated citizens. Dr. McGlonn was inspired to launch this brand because she wanted to be of service to not only marginalized people, but to the planet itself. Dr. McGlonn, for those who are interested in learning more about this incredible work that you're pursuing and just want to connect with you, how might they get in touch with you?
I think that one great place to start, just to kind of, solidify the understanding of the brand's ambition, is our website. We're really proud of it. And our IG, actually, we've been really purposeful about using Instagram as a platform for visibility. I'm so proud of our visuals. Our graphics, I think, really do the justice of communicating our values and on our product. And I think that that's a difficult line for brands to walk. And I'm really happy about the direction that we've taken there. So our social media feeds, I think, are a good place to kind of have a personal experience with our approach. And then, I think that my website is the great way to access me. You can send me a message through there. It's connected to our email, which is customerservice@grantblvd.com. And you can email me there, and I'll definitely respond. Send me a direct message on IG. The team, one of us, myself, will get back to you and welcome the love and the feedback and the bright ideas about how we can better execute the reality of the movement that we're trying to cultivate.
Yes, yes. And there's a couple of organizations that you mentioned that you support.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you came back to that, because they're such important community collaborators for us. So the first is Books Through Bars. For every blouse that you purchase or every donation that you make, contribution you make to our crowd fund, we'll send a book to Books Through Bars, which is a nonprofit based in West Philly. You can learn more about them on our website. And the other is the Center for Returning Citizens, who's the executive director is J. John Harrell, and he is a very And locally, he's an applauded advocate of the need to think differently about returning citizens specifically, but about mass incarceration broadly. And he's been a great ally in terms of our growth as a brand. So the Center for Returning Citizens and their website is another great place to go to figure out how you can support people who are, just are coming home. They're coming back to us. And how can we make sure that they're successful in that transition?
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We had a wonderful conversation. And for those who are interested in finding, if you just saw this top that Dr. McGlonn is wearing today, like, oh my God, you'll be all over it. Yes. So if you are in the market for some sustainable, stylish fashion with a social cause, social mission, please check out Grant Blvd's website.
Thank you so much for having me again.
My pleasure. My name is Tiffany Spraggins-Payne, and I'm signing off.
Hello, everybody. Ryan Martin here again. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Zigzag, and make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your favorite shows. Subscribing is 100% free, and there's a link to a short video walking you through the process in the show notes below. Thank you for listening.